Welcome back to the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. You are listening to the heartbeat of freedom and the drumbeat of truth. My co-host, Ralph Yustatola, JD, is with me as always, and our guest, Dane Wigginton, who is the guiding spirit behind GeoEngineeringWatch.org. We have been having a sobering and very, very important conversation. And there are few bright spots except for our collective willingness to make sure that we take our power legitimately into our own hands and stop the destruction of the ball of mud that our lives depend on, that every single one of us depends on for life and for sustenance. And we're killing that ball of mud.
And Rima, before the break, you mentioned a couple things. You mentioned that no matter how terminal some of those patients looked, when they simply stopped the pharmaceutical madness, gave their body what it needed to recover, miraculous things can happen. And let us hope the same can happen with planet Earth. Certainly that is our best chance to stop the single greatest assault against life on Earth, which is climate engineering, period, bar none. The data dictates
Absolutely.
that conclusion. It's inarguable. So if we can stop that assault, allow the planet to respond, and try to stop some of the other assaults on Earth as well, but this is the single greatest, and that is, again, our best hope for any even near-term survival. That's how serious our situation is. And you also mentioned fluoride. Interesting that I grew up drinking water out of a stream. We lived near the mountains. I didn't have any fluoride. And now we know from 60 lab tests from Norway that we are getting fluoride in our rain. They appear to be spraying fluoride. So perhaps if we won't drink it, they'll distribute
it to us other ways, right?
But it's uptaken everywhere. Now, fluoride has weather modification applications as well. And fluoride particulates, if moisture is aerosolized, that's how they migrate this moisture where they want it. They aerosolize it, which means they saturate it with these ultra-small nanoparticulates, which creates too many condensation nuclei so that they can migrate this rain wherever they want. They can keep it moving, keep it from falling. In the case of fluoride particulates, if it's migrating with those types of particulates, we think other metals have the same properties, similar properties. They can then hit these particulates with the right radio frequency and cause coagulation of those particulates, a big enough condensation nuclei, the rain falls. So in the case of even the Fukushima radiation, in theory, based on what we know, they could effectively migrate those plumes of radiation anywhere they want and cause it to come down anywhere they want. So that we are all literally held by the neck right now.
So actually, we've got two things coming together here. We have the geoengineering chemtrailing flights affecting the atmosphere, and then we have the HAARP radio frequencies directing the soup that's being cooked in the atmosphere. Is that a fair analysis of what may be going on?
Absolutely is, Ralph. Thank you.
Yeah, I got one more step. Let's go one more step down the rabbit hole. General Burt Stubblebine, the president of the Natural Solutions Foundation, and our esteemed co-trustee with Dr. Rima and myself in the foundation, says that for his analysis of what happened in Fukushima, there was a constant barrage of radio frequency from HAARP hitting the shelf, the fault line off the coast of Japan for several days prior to the earthquake. Can we then say that that geoengineering includes production of earthquakes using at least some of the same capacities that are used for atmospheric manipulation?
We can say that, and as hard to fathom as that is to people who are not familiar with the data, the facts back that up. And to add more to what General Burt has stated, I was told by a person, or asked, I should say, by a person who lives on the California coast who has a relative in Army intelligence, 3 days before that quake, they were told to be away from the coast that Friday morning. They asked me, because of my field of research, if I knew anything or had heard anything that they should be concerned about. Now, I didn't hear this sort of thing a lot. You can imagine my shock when I had the TV on Friday morning and saw this quake had happened. So that certainly lent a lot of credence to exactly what you just outlined, Ralph. And the bottom line is with these radio frequency transmissions, the way they really happened on to the power of some of this equipment was there was survey equipment that's extremely low power in a seismically sensitive zone that was causing tremors every time it was activated. So now let's take the HARP facilities that are literally about almost 1 billion times stronger mathematically. Now, and you can times that by several multiples given the other facilities around the globe. If they hit a seismically sensitive area with that, the data makes clear they can, in fact, trigger seismic activity. So, yes, the degree to which they're using the planet and the natural systems as a weapon cannot be overstated. It can't be. How about Cyclone Haiyan? You guys saw that cut a swath through the Philippines, right?
Right.
Yes.
That appears to be a weather weapon as well. Occupied immediately after that went through the Philippines. I don't know if you two might have seen Slovenia just got completely annihilated with an unprecedented ice storm. 6 inches of ice destroyed their country. Slovenia decided not to go along with the EU slavery program.
Right.
The country was almost immediately wiped out with an absolutely unprecedented ice storm. So the weather is being used as a weapon around the globe. It's killing the planet. It's killing all life. It's killing us, period.
There were 3 hurricanes, in effect, that hit England over this winter that caused massive flooding.
Yes.
Yes, there's been some amazing, and we're being told by the talking heads that this is all an example of climate change, and that the answer is, of course, more control in the hands of the very people who are causing it.
Yeah, and let me put a little light on that, the term climate change.
Yes.
I know they've been at these programs, ramping them up since the late 40s. So you had a period in time where, as they began to aerosolize the atmosphere, and they were doing it especially hard over the poles, and that causes a global temperature drop. So anomalously, you had temperature rise up into about the late 40s. Then you had an anomalous drop in the trend that lasted about to the 70s. Now, as you aerosolize the atmosphere, you can cool it for a while, but it starts to cause problems, shredding the ozone layer, starts to trap more heat than it deflects, disrupts the hydrological cycle, a lot of problems. So then we see the temperature start to climb again at about the 70s. By the time it got to 98, and they really ramped up the programs after 98, by the way, 98 is the warmest year ever recorded. So right at about 98, they introduced the term climate change. And this had to be done in order for them to try to make it appear as normal, these radical fluctuations in temperatures we're seeing. And thus people with that term climate change don't seem to consider it odd when it's literally 100 degrees one day and snows the next, as we saw in Amarillo, Texas, May 1st, 2013. 100 degrees in the ground, all-time record high, snowed the next day. This is completely unnatural. It's impossible without climate engineering. But because of the term, quote, climate change, they've tried to condition people to think it's normal. But again, I would argue they've forced the system farther than it can take. It's coming apart, and the degree of warming that's coming now that's been made exponentially worse by climate engineering cannot be hidden much longer. I realize there's a lot of controversy on this. I realize a lot of people who live in the East Coast probably think I'm crazy for my position. I encourage those people to look at actual statistics. Ralph, do you remember 2012? Do you remember how warm it was in 2012?
Yes.
Okay, let me put some statistics behind that. 2012, continental U.S., warmest year ever recorded by far. 362 all-time high records broken in the continental U.S., some broken by as much as 32 degrees. That's 32 degrees not over normal, but over the former high-temperature record.
Wow.
We had 0 record lows in 2012. 0. People should wonder, how could it change so much in 1 year? Because somebody made a decision to geoengineer the hell out of the eastern U.S. and create some records and create some headlines. That's how it happens, period.
But to what end? What is the purpose behind that sort of? Sounds like it's a very expensive thing to manipulate the weather on a planet. It's a very risky thing to trigger an earthquake on a seacoast where there are dozens of nuclear reactors.
So is using Corexit in the Gulf. So is having enough nuclear weapons to exterminate life on Earth 12,000 times over. That's how much nuclear weaponry we have. All those things should be stark reminders of the sort of insanity we're dealing with.
So we're dealing with a pathology. This is a very important issue. Are we dealing, Dr. Rima, with a pathology, or are we dealing with a political policy? Are we dealing with, and is it necessary that Henry Kissinger must be insane?
Is there a difference?
Right. Is Henry Kissinger or anyone in his position going to be sane? That's the question, right?
You mentioned Henry Kissinger.
Indeed.
Henry Kissinger's pathology, and he is a very, very crazy dude. Henry Kissinger's pathology became political policy because Richard Nixon, who was a very, very crazy dude, accepted his Henry Kissinger's and National Security Memorandum 200 policy suggestion to say that the first priority of American foreign policy must be population reduction, starting with the third world. Starting with the third world, right? And I think Dane will have no problem agreeing with the concept that it's extended past the third world. So it became public policy, it became national doctrine, that is the word for it, became national doctrine, and the pathology expanded into the public process, which is now very, very crazy.
All of that is exactly on target, and certainly when I outline all the things I do that I believe are direct motivations for the climate modification programs, eugenics certainly must be considered a part of this mix. And at minimum, we know that they know how toxic this mix is, because we have studies from the Air Force from even the late 90s on the nanoparticulates. And we have synergistic toxicity. All of these metals are very toxic in and of themselves. When you combine them, synergistic toxicity, for example, in the case of aluminum and mercury, can increase the overall toxicity by as much as 10,000%. So they know how lethal it is. People who are sick and not firing on neurons don't tend to protest much. And Rima, as you stated earlier, with fluoride, same situation there. So it's a bad mix. Not very many people are awake, but we are very close, I believe, extremely close to conditions that will wake even the most comatose, or at least they will have to pull their head from the sand because they won't have another bite of food to eat. And we're perilously close to a complete overturning of our reality.
Now,
that's absolutely true.
On that note, again, with what do we do? And so many people, when they hear data this dire, they tend to shut down, and that's certainly not what I want. What I want to do is express to people that we are all on the end of the plank, period. We can fall off the end, or we can turn around and start screaming. And if we could simply bring this situation, this climate engineering nightmare, to critical mass of awareness, the dominoes would fall. And we already see this with, there's a congressional candidate I know whose brother, he absolutely believes, is a part of these programs. He's very high up in the Air Force. And there is an absolute civil war in that household because now the family knows. They know what the brother's involved with. And I think, again, if we could reach this critical mass of awareness, the vast, vast majority of people carrying out these programs are military brothers and sisters who simply don't know what they're doing and have been told it's something benevolent for the common good when they know better. Those in power, those psychopathic people that have brought us to this point will not have the ability to carry out these programs, and that's the goal.
So the message we need to get out to the NSA handlers who are recording this program and reporting to whoever they report to about what you and Dr. Rima and I are saying, the message is that you and your kids are not exempt from this. Eugenics presupposes some plan to make the species better, but the random use of toxins in the air doesn't have any potential to make anything other than dead people, including the relatives and even the perpetrators themselves.
Which is why I say, listen up, folks. First of all, don't vaccinate your kids, whether you work for the NSA or not. Don't vaccinate your kids. Get an exemption. And second of all, in terms of the problems that we're talking about with Dane Wigginton, our guest tonight, is talking about, that he writes about on Geoengineering Watch and speaks.org, and speaks so widely about and writes so widely about. You're either part of the solution or you're part of the topsoil. You don't have an exemption from breathing. You don't have an exemption from eating. You don't have an exemption from drinking. And you don't have an exemption from the cataclysmic effects of what is being done to the planet. Your feet stand on this planet, and if the planet dies, you die, and your kids die.
No.
It doesn't matter who you work for. It doesn't matter who your allegiance is to. On the political side, when the tyranny is fully installed, historical record shows us that the first people that the tyrants kill are the goons who help them install the tyranny, because they know that those people are disloyal and untrustworthy because they changed sides once. They could change sides again. So you're gone. You're out of the picture. But I think you have kids. I think you have wives and husbands and mothers and fathers and children and sisters and brothers. And their planet is dying too. If you are part of the planetary murder, then you have a delusion that somehow you'll be safe. You're no safer than we are, and you can stop it. All we can do is inform each other and inform you. But you can say, I'm sorry, sir, I'm not flying another chemtrail mission. You can say to your fellow pilots and the mechanics who take care of the planes and the people who fill the tanks, you can say, do you know what this shit is doing to us? Do you understand what infertility means? Do you understand that the reason that Fred down the street got cancer is because of what we're doing to him? I don't like this. I don't want to do this. And let me take you back to the 1960s and the 1970s, where we had T-shirts and keychains and banners that said, suppose they gave a war and nobody came.
Indeed, Dr. Rima. And I was reading an interesting essay a couple of days ago. It was written, I think, in 1994 by Murray Rothbard, just before he passed on, and he was talking about the nature of change. And he was observing that no elite voluntarily gives up its power while it still thinks that it can get something from that power. And he was basically talking about the final collapse of the Soviet Union. And he observed that it didn't collapse. It was a very effective tyranny. You know, it used psychiatry, it used the gulag, it used a lot of things. It used mass terror on occasion in order to maintain its power. But finally, it collapsed. And it collapsed because the elite themselves could no longer trust that they were going to benefit from the system. Even during the period of the Stalinist terror, when most of the victims, by the way, were communist bureaucrats, during that period, there were always people willing to work their way up in the system. They thought they might survive. But by the end of the system, the people who ran it gave up on the possibility of it being able to function. And that's really what Dr. Rima is asking of the pilots and the maintenance people and the lower level people who know what's going on in the geoengineering crime. You know, that crime is going to, either you're going to stop it or eventually you're going to be held accountable. The people who ran the Soviet Union never thought they'd be held accountable, but in the end they were. The people who ran Nazi Germany never thought they'd be held accountable, but in the end they dangled from ropes in the prison at Nuremberg.
Well, not all of them.
Not
Some
all
of them served brief terms and then went back to work as the heads of the pharmaceutical industry and created the Codex Alimentarius.
Right.
But a lot of them did get held accountable.
Yeah.
Including, these are all great points. And Ralph, to kind of go into what you mentioned, I believe there is a power structure splintering going on right now. And that's in our favor, certainly, as what you described. My wife is from Lithuania. She was at the flashpoint where the Soviet Union collapsed. She was there at the square where the Russian tanks ran over some other Lithuanians, and that's where it happened. And she certainly witnessed how fast something could turn directions at that point when the Lithuanian people had enough. They didn't care anymore about anything but standing their ground. And that's where we need to be right now. And so many people are not yet there, and they need to get there quickly. And one of the most apathetic aspects in this whole equation are the environmental groups. I'm sad to say I consider myself, nobody cares about the environment any more than I do, but the quote-unquote environmental groups have been absolutely abysmal because they think if they just work on their little pet project somewhere, and I'm sorry I sound a bit jaded. I am. I absolutely am. Because they are literally playing shuffleboard on the deck of the Titanic while it sinks. We must plug the hole in the bottom of the ship. Any other activity right now will be, as I said, a moot point. And even though, yes, we're being poisoned, and yes, it's affecting our health, it is also, we are very close to the Earth being clearly past any point of being able to continue sustaining life. And that is so close. It's not centuries away. It's not perhaps even decades away. We are so close to a very non-linear equation. People need to understand that. They've been trained to think and conditioned to think that if it took 200 years of industrial activity to get us to this point, then we can look at a graph and project that forward. This is non-linear. It's like lighting a stick of dynamite. Fuse burns at a certain pace, but when it hits the end, that is the end. So people need to understand the immediacy of our situation. I hope people like in environmental groups, and I was on a radio show with Greenpeace's top scientist about 6 weeks ago, and I think anybody who listened to that show would be clear that he knows this is going on, but he's simply not willing to speak out. And that needs to change fast because we don't have tomorrow. So I hope people find their courage. I hope, as Rima encouraged the pilots and other people to speak out, it's now or never. We don't have time on our side with this equation.
Are you saying, did I understand you to say that Greenpeace's top scientist won't speak out? Did I get that right?
That's exactly what I stated. I was on national radio with him. And, I mean, I, in no uncertain terms, made it clear to him on that show that I thought he was being incredibly disingenuous for not admitting that he knew damn good and well these programs are going on. And anybody who heard his sheepish reply, I think, would be clear that he knew. So it's, at this point, even from Greenpeace stated openly, they've stated on the record that they know about these programs, but it's not on their agenda. Well, you know, that's like saying I don't want to put the fire in the house out because I'm too busy mowing the lawn. That doesn't work. It doesn't get it. It doesn't get the job done. The ship's sinking. The water's coming over the deck right now. So when these groups take that position, and even Amy Goodman, you know who Amy Goodman is, I'm sure.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of
Amy
course.
Goodman, who I supported out of my pocket to the tune of about $15,000 airing her show going back some 10 years. But I now know she's been basically paid off by the Ford Foundation. She will not touch this issue. She ridicules anybody who even brings it up. And I would argue Amy Goodman now does more harm than good. Because if her followers believe that if it was happening that she would tell them, which is now a lie, then those people are never going to look. They won't even look at the data. They won't look at tapes like George's award-winning documentary Look Up. They will not even acknowledge that they received it. We've mailed it to them. They won't even acknowledge receipt of it. We know they received it. That's how hijacked people are in this equation now. And I simply, their honor is a very short commodity right now, or a very short supply. So we need to know, we need the people who are willing to make a difference in this equation. They need to stand up, help, make their voice heard, and assist us in bringing these programs to light immediately, or all is lost.
I absolutely agree. Greenpeace shocks me. When I was a college student, and I lived, quite literally, I was working my way through college. I had 2 jobs, and I lived on about 35 cents a day, which would buy me 1 quart of raw, unprocessed, unpasteurized, and homogenized milk, and that's what I lived on unless somebody took me to lunch or dinner. At that time, I would save $1 a month and I would send it to Greenpeace because I believed so strongly in what they were doing. And lately, I've been hearing stories like this from people that I trust and believe in, and it's heartbreaking. But in addition to my personal sentimentality about the the corruption of good people and good organizations like Amy Goodman, like Greenpeace, in addition to that, which doesn't really matter, we have to transcend them, and we have to find other communicators who can spread the word. You can, I can. There are other good people out there who are willing to, and they become the next line of defense. We become the next line of defense. Thank goodness for internet radio broadcasting. Everybody can have an internet radio show. Everybody.
And they need to use those channels immediately because we don't know how long we'll have them. And there's awareness of this at high levels now, Rima and Ralph. I had an almost top of the ladder meeting at the state capitol about 3 weeks ago, and that was just a closed door meeting with the almost highest in command of the state, and they know now, they have data, but will they have the backbone to stand up? That's a question. And my appeal to the officials I met with were that their willingness to ignore this issue would completely forfeit any chance their children have for any future at all. And if that doesn't reach them, nothing will. Nothing will.
How did they respond to that?
From a clear initial apparent denial from before they had this much data, there was from the most important person in attendance, there was a deep breath, a sitting back in the chair, and the statement, "I didn't need this." But not in rejection, simply in realizing the totality of this issue. And I know wheels are turning right now, but I don't know how far they'll get, because those that run these programs can lower the hammer on anyone. But the bottom line is all of us who engage in such battles are at risk. Are any of us risking any less than the others? And if the whole ship is going down, and it is, it absolutely is, then at what point do we make our voice heard? That point is now. It's absolutely now. And if we all stand together, we can't all be taken down. We can't. If we all work on starting spot fires, this is what we're trying to do right now in the States, Rima. We're up to about our color glossy informational flyers. It's a heavy quality flyer that people tend to keep and not throw away. We've distributed about 70,000 of those so far. We're ordering them now 20,000 at a time. We're trying to hit universities and trying to start spot fires of awareness everywhere. And if we start enough of those spot fires, they'll merge into a giant blaze that can't be put out. That's the goal. And
that is the right goal. That's the goal, because the power to stop this, and this here can be, in this sentence, the word "this" can be replaced by any one of the atrocities that we're dealing with. But the power to stop the atrocity lies in one place, and that is with us. As your Lithuanian wife will, I'm sure, articulately make clear to people if asked, the power is with us. When we change our internal programming, our meme, and say, no more. I'm mad as hell and I'm not taking it anymore. No more. You may not do this. We will find the power, and we will find the persistence necessary to find the methods to do it, if we haven't waited too long, and if we don't die collectively together saying, I shoulda, woulda, coulda, gosh, I kind of wish I had.
Yes.
It's not.
Time is now. And with the climate engineering programs, with what we already know, they're dumping on us day in, day out, 24/7. Our days are numbered. But I want to point out to people that in the last decade plus, there has been the biolabs in the U.S. that experiment with lethal pathogens has gone from 40 to 400. They're doing something. And certainly what they have engineered right now with the spraying apparatus globally already set up, anytime they want, anytime they choose to change the mix of what they're putting out in the skies, it's game over for all of us right then. We know now, popular science, I don't think they realized they weren't supposed to publicize this, but they found E. coli bacteria at 33,000 feet. This has been publicized in mainstream media now. So we know actually that E. coli is a quite powerful biological ice nucleator. And there is some data to indicate they've been experimenting with E. coli as a nucleator. So this would potentially accomplish two things at once for the power structure. It can help create artificial ice nucleation for weather events, engineered weather events, and it can certainly make us sick as well. So again, when we have organizations like Popular Science admitting on the record that they're finding E. coli at 33,000 feet, and they can't figure out how it got there, people should be alarmed as hell. I mean, there's no escaping from this. There's nowhere you can hide. Nowhere.
This answers part of the question. What kind of shit are they putting in our air?
Indeed.
We don't know completely. Now, in the last round of snow tests, we know we have copious amounts of aluminum, barium. Now we know we have copper and chloride as well in the snow. So these are all associated with artificial ice nucleation. And I've seen in the trailless wilderness behind where I live, there's a couple thousand miles of trailless wilderness, and I know the woods. I've grown up there. But I just saw after the last artificial ice nucleating event, there was, in some of the backwaters in the most remote streams, there was a blue silt. I didn't have anything to take a test sample with, but what is that? And people are reporting that in some of the snow melt in other places as well, when they can get it to melt. We had actually George Barnes, who took a snow sample, filmmaker George Barnes from SkyderAlert.com, took a snow sample, and after the second or third time of trying to get the snow to melt and having it just gas out and having nothing left to sample, he sealed the container so that whatever moisture he perceived as being there would remain. The container blew up.
Oh my God.
He showed a picture of this completely exploded container that, because this material is gassing, it's gassing out, and it couldn't contain that pressure. So yes, we can only speculate completely at what they're putting on us. They've been at this for so long. And again, people need to understand the gravity of not being able to walk out your door and breathe without sucking in whatever they want to spray. And that's what's happening.
Well, you don't have to walk out of your door to be exposed to this. People have to understand the importance of not being able to inhale. Because if you really think that the particulates are stopped by your window screens, or don't come through the doors and windows and leaks in your house, then you don't understand the nature of this problem.
Exactly
it's
right, Rima.
Every breath, it's every sip of water.
It is the same insidiousness that we find in the Fukushima radiation.
Yes, you can't escape it. And people think they can put a mask on and filter it. Does no good at all. These particulates go right through any medium like that, and they wonder, or they convince themselves that the air testing agencies like CARB, California Air Resources Board, or EPA would show this if it was happening. Completely untrue. The entire system has been designed not to show this contamination. At best, they test for PM 2.5 microns, which is huge in comparison to the nanoparticulates we're talking about. So that the nanoparticles, which are infinitely more harmful than the larger particulates, go completely under the radar, and they don't even test now. In the state of California, water quality stopped testing for aluminum in 2002. Fish and Game doesn't test for aluminum in the runoff waters anymore. The system has been designed from bottom to top not to show this. That simple.
Which is exactly what the United States government and the Canadian government have done with their radiation testing. They turned off the system and they said, we don't see any problems. None of our, what was that? None of our systems show any harm to human health. Well, yeah, you turned them off.
Yeah, and let's take even something as glaring as that people notice how hot the sun feels on their face now in many regions in the northern hemisphere as well as the southern. But when you have enough UV to burn the bark off of trees, as I've described earlier, I think even on your show, that's a tremendous amount of UV.
Excuse me, we're getting some feedback. Ralph, is that coming?
Nope,
from
it's coming
your
from
system?
it's coming from the phone.
Okay.
I can't. Hopefully, you guys can hear me okay. And
yes, go ahead.
For example, can be.
There's definitely a very almost as loud as your own voice sound in the background. I'm sorry.
Is there somebody at your end?
Nope, it's gone now.
I hear it on this end.
Yes, you're hearing it on your end, but it's not in your room, is it?
No.
Well, there we go, folks. We only have 15 minutes left, and they finally got their system set up to interfere. It is always entertaining. Thank you, NSA, for your Thursday night entertainment. Yes, Dane, it's very interesting that you should have come to this point in the discussion when the interference starts. What is it that they want us not to know?
It is interesting because, when we posted the UV data, if you can still hear me?
Yes.
When we posted the UV data, which we worked on for a considerable time before we actually put it up on the site, within 15 minutes our site was taken down. It was pulled 8 times in the next 3 days. So it is interesting. And now we know that the UV readings that are given to the public every day are nothing more than a fabricated lie, literally. So people need to pay attention to their own senses, the fact they can see these planes spraying, the fact the sun is so intense it burns the bark off of trees, it's causing blindness. UVB causes a host of optical issues. So bottom line is the walls are closing in extremely rapidly. And I hope people look at this issue as a priority issue. It's not what I wanted to do. This is not my pet issue. It's simply what data dictates as being the priority, the hole in the bottom of the ship that must be dealt with or the ship goes down.
And it's also, in some sense, a unifying concept. It brings together what's going on the ground, under the ground, in the air, what's happening electromagnetically and what's happening chemically. It seems to be, and of course, how does the radiation fit into the mix? In what way is Fukushima radiation synergistic with the chemicals being used in the chemtrailing or the novel proteins being released by the thousands of square miles of GMO monoculture?
There's no studies on that I'm aware of, but we do know this, that inevitably when various toxic elements are combined, the overall toxicity always escalates. And in the case of the nanoparticulates, again, for those that are fighting for the GMO-free foods and planet, we know that these particulates are bioavailable. They're being uptaken in all plant life. And again, according to Norwegian and German researchers that are quite in-depth with their study in this arena, they're seeing horizontal gene mutation in all plant life. We're seeing mutated plants in the forests of Northern California now. This material is there. It's being uptaken. And we can only guess at what it's doing to organisms. But we are seeing absolutely in the field mutated native organisms. So there is no no organic food at this point. None. Literally none. So we're taking this stuff in through our air, through our food, through our water, and quite simply, we no matter what else we do, we should try to take care of our health, and certainly the hemp oil and products like that, very beneficial to try to keep our organisms strong. Those are some of the best elements you can utilize, but we must stop the constant contamination, or ultimately we will end up in the same place quite soon. And
are there any places in the world, whether it's a city or a town or a country or a state, are there any places in the world that have said, stop, you may not do this in my airspace?
It's funny you ask that now, because we're about to publish a story from someone from Mexico that there's quite a bit of data to back it up that correlates with other things we've been told. Mexico appeared to push back as one country. Now, first let me start with Ireland. Ireland appeared to push back some years ago, and they were financially immediately collapsed. Now, Mexico, based on the data we got, we're pushing back against these programs, and they actually stopped for a time just prior to the swine flu outbreak. immediately after the swine flu outbreak, the spraying ensued. And was that the shot across the bow of Mexico, the swine flu issue? We don't know, but it sure seemed to correlate. And so nobody stops those in power from doing this if they want to. They by one means or another, will bring any country that attempts to stand against them to their knees. So, and we can see this again with the Philippines, with Pakistan, who showed resistance to U.S. policy. They found their country under record flooding within weeks. Thailand, the same thing. I just mentioned Slovenia. So, by one means or another, they will bring any country to their knees that would dare stand against them. So, simply, we all have to stand together, and we all have to take this stand now, or we won't have tomorrow.
Who's them?
Pardon me?
Who is them?
Those that print the money. Those that print the money. When people ask who are they and who supports this and who funds it, I think we must look at all the glaring red flags we have that lead to the same global central banker elite power structure that prints the money. All roads lead to that point. And when we can trace ownership, for example, of Weather Channel, Weather Central, Weather Underground, all the major weather disseminating agencies, all to Rothschild's ownership and or affiliate front ownerships that connected them, we have a clear indicator of who's behind all this. And certainly when we know now that the Pentagon, according to RTTV, and there's solid documentation to back this up, the Pentagon can't account for $8.5 trillion since 96. Now, where did they get this money to begin with? This money wasn't even supposed to exist, but now there's $8.5 trillion that can't be accounted for. What else don't we know about? In the case of California, I've spoken in front of CARB, California Air Resources Board. I've spoken in front of the California Energy Commission and served their scientists up mountains of data, which they ignore. And the only explanation for this, for example, in the state of California, they're 30, 40, or $50 billion short in their budget every year. Where does that deficit go? Where does it go? Why? How does it just disappear, and why does nobody talk about it? Because those that run the central banks can prop up or allow to implode anybody they wish. They can make or break anybody they wish because they print the money. That's how everything's controlled. We simply have to understand that the reality we've known is coming to an end. Those carrying out these programs have to realize hiding will not save them. We have to take a stand now, or the planet's life support systems will not continue much longer, nor will our health, nor will our ability to think. Our time is short.
Indeed. In fact, we only have a couple of minutes left before the end of the program. It's that short. And yes, indeed, Dan, the time is short. The radiation continues to pile up. The toxins continue to pile up. The GMO novel proteins continue to escalate and infiltrate. It almost seems as though some sort of a tipping point is being reached. Not the tipping point of the climate change that the powers that be like to talk about, but a tipping point in the chemical toxicity of the northern hemisphere, at least. And that, Dr. Rima, as an environmental physician, must cause you some concern.
Absolutely. It causes me more than some concern.
Well, understood.
No question. Is there any real weather left anywhere in the world, Dane? No,
nothing can be considered natural at this point. We're far past that. If you even tampering with the system on a smaller scale could potentially disrupt the entire system, but what we see is a complete hijacking of Earth's natural weather systems. There is no natural weather. It cannot be considered natural in any way, shape, or form. So, again, they have us by the throat from every direction, and as Ralph correctly stated, climate engineering, very uniting subject, people from all spectrums.
And there we go. We have reached the end of the program. No real weather left. Next week, folks.